Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guests are Anne Fiegen and Marie Davidson. They are returning guests, and they are representing Grant Street Writers with their second book. Welcome back, Anne and Marie.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
It's been a while since our last episode, Wednesdays with Winston. Tell us a little bit about who the Grant Street Writers are.
Sure. We're a group of writers who meet on a weekly basis. And the name is derived from the fact that we had met weekly at my home, which is on Grant Street in Evanston. COVID has altered that, but that's hence the name. We have a lot of similarities and we have enough differences to make our writing diverse and interesting. And we've also become very good friends, which was an added benefit of the original plan. So it's that's essentially who we are. We have one book, as you mentioned, one previous book called Wednesdays with Winston, and this would be our second effort.
I see. And Winston has passed. I'm sorry to hear about that. And Grant Street Writers don't meet on Wednesdays either. So what inspired your Grant Street Writers to write again? Now you have the benefit of Zoom too, right?
Yes, that's been a big help. Yeah, we did lose Winston, very sad, the sweetest dog imaginable. And after our really wonderful book launch for our first book, Wednesdays with Winston, we never really stopped. I think none of us wanted to be a one-hit wonder, that we were inspired to keep going. And but it was actually necessary to renegotiate the group because we couldn't all meet on Wednesdays anymore. That was number one. And there was also some interest in maybe not meeting every week. We had been doing that, and it seemed like a bit too often to some of us because we weren't all writing so much. And so we tried having a hybrid for a while, with some of us meeting, all of us meeting once a month and the others meeting once a week. And that was really very unmanageable. And we were able to, because we grew, have more people, that going back to once a week was really the way to go. And so we've been doing that. And so the answer is that we just never stopped. And we kept going with fits and starts. And the other question is, why did we do another book?
That is a wonderful encouragement to all writers out there. You just keep going. It is the best time to use your talents and share them with other writers. And you say that, and Grant Street Writers have grown, and I understand that Grant Street Writers are no longer just women writers. Can you tell us a little bit more and the additional writers you have added?
Right, we've branched out. Some of us were members of a writing group in the city called the Budlong Writers, and they affiliated with the Budlong Library. And when we were looking to expand our horizons a bit, we invited some writers from the Budlong group who we thought would be good fits to join us. And they fortunately all accepted. And the fact that the majority of them were men has really changed the dynamic positively of our group, and we're enjoying even an international component because one of the writers that joined us has since moved back to his native Australia, and he and his sister, who lives in New Zealand, join us on a weekly basis as well. So we have an international component, which adds to our prestige and certainly adds to the fun of being a part of the group, because they're delightful people and their lives are very different from ours. So it's a very nice mix that we're enjoying a lot.
Well, Anne, you said the meetings occur in your backyard or in your home. Can you tell us, do you have an agenda for your writers? Is it a 2-hour meeting, or do you have to leave by 3 hours?
We don't have an end spot. So sometimes people stay 3 hours, sometimes, and people can come and go if they have to leave early, etc. So there isn't really a strict time frame and not a formal agenda at all. Everyone who brings work reads their work, and there's discussion of the work, and we get sidetracked and talk over one another. And it's very relaxed, which is for me part of the appeal anyway. It's open to lots of different discussions. So there is no strict agenda.
Yeah, like having friends over and working on a project.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. And you know, sometimes some meetings are more productive than others because sometimes we get off on tangents that are delightful and interesting and we just never want to stop talking about them, but they don't have a lot to do with the writing process. So, but that happens very infrequently, but it does happen.
So, and Marie, we've all talked about having men add into your group. How does that affect your dynamics of the group?
It's been a very positive impact, I think, on the group. But to start with, I mean, the very first meeting I attended where the men were there, what did I bring along but an essay I wrote about a mammogram that I had? And I thought, how is this going to work? And in fact, they were just the men were very sympathetic, and you know, they're mature people. You know, they know what a mammogram is. And I was like, oh, I can feel like safe and open with this group. Another thing that's been positive about having men is they approach interpersonal relationships in a very different way. And they're much less likely to take offense or be miffed or hold a grudge. I mean, certainly they're capable of all of that, but you know, it's put us into a better frame of just cooperative sharing. I think that when it was just women, we were together, and we also went through the difficulties of the first book. You know, we got to that, we became like sort of sisters with one of our members, our Japanese member, she's the youngest of 5 girls, and she writes a lot about that sister thing going. And we had a little of that. So the men came in and straightened us right out. So I'm very grateful.
So very straightforward and less of that hedging and being watching out for not want to upset anyone, right?
That's right. Less feelings.
Honest opinions, right?
Right.
Oh, I think during COVID, the most important thing we can have is to learn about how other people live and what they're experiencing.
Absolutely, and just the contact, you know, during COVID, just
Isn't it?
Not face to face, but the human contact has been so beneficial and so sustaining for all of us.
Yes, and so powerful, you know, therapeutic for everyone.
Absolutely.
Now, how do you coordinate works from 13 writers? I mean, is there a page limit to each contributor, or do you have to give some people more pages, or you know, you say you have, I believe this time you have more poets too, right?
There's 13 of us, and but there are 13, and they're very prolific. So there's a lot of choices, and that was the big reason why we wanted to do a second book. It was really, I think, 2 of us, and I wasn't one of them, who put their heads together and said, let's do another book. We have so much more material. And then it was more a matter of each author choosing the work they thought was their best, and then having a kind of page limit, you know, so it wasn't just how many pieces, but how much space in the book it would take up.
Yeah.
And so some sort of a balance. It turned out to not be a difficult thing to do in the end.
Well, it certainly sounds like you're inspiring each other.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
big part of the group.
Yeah. And you touched on a little bit about this, but how have you adapted to meeting during COVID? Did you started with all Zoom and then eventually come back to a hybrid situation?
We did. We started with Zoom, and as you know, it has its pluses and minuses, but the good news was we were still able to continue writing and meeting, which was of great benefit to us all. Then for a time, when things were apparently calming down, we went back to meeting at my house again, and that lasted for, I don't know, Marie, a few weeks.
They were we also met in your backyard. Anne has a beautiful backyard.
So we were outside, so that added to any anxiety that people might have. So we had masks and we were in the backyard. But then when it started to rage again, we decided to go back to the Zoom, which we're on now, and toying with the idea of perhaps if things keep going in a positive direction, starting to to meet together again and have it be a hybrid, because obviously we have people in Australia and New Zealand, and sometimes people can't come for one reason or another, can't physically come, but they could certainly participate on Zoom. So it's going to turn out to be a benefit to have as a backup.
Yes, well, I think that having experienced this Zoom option has also stimulated our creativity. How are we going to make things work and meet anyway? Even though we just got dumped a lot of snow last night.
Right, it's a whole new world, you know, and I think we're all learning how to best utilize it as a resource.
Yes, I look forward to meeting you in your backyard.
Anytime you want, anytime, you're more than welcome.
You can be an honorary guest anytime and bring some writing.
Oh, absolutely. I will. But Marie, you were going to say something?
Oh yes, I was going to say, I looked out the window this morning and thought, I'm glad that I don't have to dig out and drive to the Glenview Village Hall today.
Yes. So there are some benefits, especially during the winter months. And you know, we had a pretty tough winter. I mean, if it were a little warmer, if we had one of those 40-degree winters, then it wouldn't seem like Zoom is such an attractive option.
That's right. That and the combination of the COVID, it's just not as onerous to be inside now as it is when the weather clears and you feel like being outside and being together.
Well, so what are some of the new works we can look forward to and then we wrote?
In addition to some of the things that may seem a little familiar from our writers, many of us do write nonfiction pieces in the memoir vein. So they're about our lives and observations about life. We also have a lot more poetry and I would say more humor in both the poetry and prose. That might be a reaction to COVID. I don't know. It's in the dark of COVID, you have to find something to laugh about. But the poetry has, for me, been really inspiring. We have poets who write in very traditional forms, like the Shakespearean sonnet. Right. And we have other poets who write in what I would call more esoteric forms, like the Sestina, or something called the ghazal, which is an Arabic melody. I don't know, but it's very complicated. But they all say, when they do it, that having a form to fit yourself into, even though it seems like it's a constraint, it can free you, because then you're finding new ways to say things that you want to say. We also have 4 of our contributors who have accompanied their work with their own drawings. Oh. So I think, and the last book we only had, I think, 1. And that's been a great addition. So it's a wonderful mix. I really quite like the fact that it's so varied.
Well, during COVID, I think the most sustaining activity is reading, because that would not be subject to canceling or any kind of disappointment. Reading is always a joy. And
you don't have to wear a mask, right?
Right. You don't have to wear a mask when you're reading your own.
Or write. You don't cancel writing either.
Right.
Right. That's, sustaining that kind of rhythm, I think, is so valuable during this COVID time where things are canceling or things are, getting very sticky with wearing a mask or not. But okay, now we were in contact during COVID, emails, and there were some delays during your production. I remember can you tell us more about that? I remember there was something about paper shortage even. I mean, wow, what have you gone through to get this beauty?
The paper shortage never materialized, but for us, but it certainly was one of the things that we thought could affect the final production. We had more than our share of setbacks. I think we had beginner's luck with the first book. It just seemed to, not that people didn't work for it, but it sailed through much more effortlessly, or appeared to anyway, than this one. One of the problems that we encountered was we lost our designer. What was it, Marie? About maybe a quarter of the way into the process. Even
more at the beginning, fortunately.
Yeah, and she she had also worked with us on our first book, so she landed running, you know, and there's a great benefit, obviously, great benefit to that because of the similarities in the two books. So we finally had to identify a new designer, and then he had to be caught up to speed, and it all moved along, but there were times when it felt like it wasn't going to. So it was a different experience from the first one entirely, but ultimately we ended up in a good place, and all's well that ends well. You know, we have the piece in our hands, and everybody's proud of it, and you kind of forget about the obstacles that you encounter.
It's like giving birth.
That's right. They say you don't remember labor. I think I kind of do remember it, but not as acutely, not so acutely as to
Right.
duplicate the process.
Well, I remember you had some trouble with the cover. So who completed the cover? Now this is something you're quite happy with, right?
Yes.
We are, and it was definitely a joint effort. I mean, it started off with a cover that we thought looked more like our other cover with a more conventional photograph. And we had a cover committee, which I was on, so it made it a little less cumbersome to make decisions. And the designer, when he was working with it, said because it was, it's an iPhone camera cover, so, it has its limitations. He said he really couldn't make this cover look the way he thought we wanted it to. And he offered to take a crack at using the elements of the photograph and doing a different design, which is what we wound up with. So if you hold that up a little more, you can see that there's a notebook under the title with a pencil, and then we wrote, and in the background there's a vase with some flowers, and there used to be a coffee cup. I don't think that went away.
We lost the cup.
You're right. And now it's a sepia instead of a very colored photograph. And we all liked how contemporary it looked and modern. So we got to that. It wasn't easy, but we did, and we all like it. And the edits of the content went through, it seemed like many iterations, with some of us doing major, like, proofreading, and then eventually our coordinator, we had one person who was the coordinator, doing all the final work and back and forth with the designer. And for those people who don't know, I mean, getting a book out is, you don't just write it and then boom, it's there. It goes through a whole lot of shaping in the process, but we got there and we're happy.
Oh, I think that's important lessons to share with our writers. And you said who is your editor or the person who helped you format the formatting? Is it Philip Guess?
Philip Gessert is the designer, and he's based actually in Texas. And the member of our group who was the person who took on this coordination project, the big one, was Judy Suhu. So they were the ones primarily working together at the end.
Oh my. Yes, I had the pleasure of meeting Judy Suhu during this time, and she's contributed with some Chinese American memories. And I think that's just a peek into such a wonderful collection you have. Mm-hmm. And I must say, thank you for inviting me to write a review for your book. So
thank you for doing
it. I think our audience should know how you plan for the reviews, because that takes another stage and step in producing this cover. And this could be a very good tip for our writers.
I think the most important thing in doing that is not to aim beyond your scope. We all have connections in our lives, that people whose opinions are very credible and who are known locally and some more than locally. And to rely on those people makes the most sense. They're the most likely to say yes. They're the most recognizable to the immediate people around you. And that's what we did. We all came forth with a name or names that we thought might be willing to do that. And your name, of course, came up, and we're thrilled that you did it. Thank you so much. And the reviews that we got were sterling. I mean, at one meeting, we said, boy, is the book really that good? just were effusive, and it made us feel wonderful. And I think it does nothing but add to the marketability of the book and its credibility. So, as I said, we appreciate your contribution. Thank you.
Well, I think this is a day we should just stop doubting and start believing. Uh,
Good idea.
so part of that belief, proving how much you believe in your work. Now, what book marketing events do you plan to do in 2022? Now we are possibly going to open up more.
That's so exciting. So I think we're all looking forward to planning a second book launch party because we had such a good time at that. And it was a very feel-good feeling. Not that we sold a lot of books there, but it was really a party more than anything else. And so going forward, I mean, you're absolutely right. There should be more opportunities at book fairs and local venues that I know can invite local authors to talk about their books, and social media. I mean, the truth is that this group is we're not a bunch of marketers. And so I don't think our expectations are necessarily that high that we're going to sell lots of books, but we're trying to get the word out there, and it is available on Amazon and as a print on demand, but it will also be an ebook eventually, and Philip Gessert's working on that. So getting the word out and sitting back and seeing what happens. We don't really have a plan beyond that, but we're looking forward to that part.
Well, sometimes the marketing is done by social media. Also, book marketing, I think, is a lot to do with relationship with the community. I believe that Glenview Library is having a local author event this year, so maybe there's a great place where we can all meet.
And we all did, those of us who are on Facebook, many of us posted it there. And historically with the other book, when that was done, there was a peak a peak, we're talking about
a bump,
a little incline in sales. So, if each of us does that, or for those of us who have done it, there is an effect on the sales. So it's a valuable tool for what it is.
Yeah, so you all have different social groups you belong to. Yeah, so what connects you to Glenview?
We have 3 members who are, Marie included, who are Glenview residents. And obviously proximity to Glenview, we're all kind of one here. But our primary claim to Glenview is that 3 of our Sterling members are residents of that suburb.
That's great. And that's a majority, isn't it?
Well, depending on how you count.
It's a significant minority, let's say.
So what is your message for our writers out there?
I would say that anyone out there who's listening, if you are an aspiring writer or you're starting writing or wherever you are, you have to just write. Sit down and write and try to be disciplined about it. That's the first thing. We've all learned that. Being in a group really helps. And if you can find it, it's not so hard to find a group these days. Most of us met through a writing class years ago, but now with Facebook and meetups and all these things that you can find online, you can find people. And being in a group, as we often say, keeps us accountable. Like eventually we notice when someone's not making a lot of contributions, and give them encouragement. I've learned so much from my group, and I think I've grown, and I think that it's so important. Telling stories is such an important human activity, whether you tell your own or you make it up. And that's, people are sustained and nourished by stories.
Well, Marie, why don't you share a story with us?
Here's something that I've done. Whenever we have a meeting of our group, I have a notebook and I write the names of the people who read that day and the title. And then sometimes I get an idea, and then I go over to the left-hand side and I write in a little box, idea, and then I write that down. And then I go back and try to work with that. I mean, that's a source of inspiration. So the most recent one I wrote was about many, many years ago when I lived in Jerusalem and went to a Hebrew class in this old pond where I was with like 24 other people from all around the world. And I just wrote that. I haven't even shared it with the group yet. But really, it was inspired by something that one of our members wrote about. She had also lived in Jerusalem. And I realized that experience I had was an amazing experience of being with adults who were suddenly thrust back into first grade because they didn't know how to speak Hebrew. So that's the story that I told about how after 5 months, I could actually kind of stumble out on the street and speak passable conversational Hebrew. And I'm so glad I revisited that experience because it was a wonderful one.
And that is true how stories inspire more stories. It just grows and on itself. Anne, do you have a story you can share with us
Well, there are lots of stories, but I think on the subject of stories, the first book, as Marie mentioned, was memoir, strictly true stories as related by those people who lived them. This one has the addition of some fiction, and one of the fictional components is the delightful work of a man called Brian Harrison, and his writing is so whimsical and so humorous and so uniquely his that if you had 20 manuscripts, you could pick out the one that was his. And so the joy and the magic of a fictional story is also in this book, and I think it does nothing but enhance the experience, and something that people will enjoy reading in this book that wasn't in the first one. So that's another kind of story, but made up stories are delightful as well.
I'm so glad you said that, Anne, because sometimes we sit there and after he's read his piece, we say, could we be in your brain for just a minute?
Could I spend 5 minutes in your brain? Because it's got to be a wonderful place to be and a very unique place to be,
yeah,
especially now, takes you out of where you are. It's absolutely delightful. And he's looking to do his own book. So that's something to think about for the future.
Well, that's the energy we love to share. The energy that makes us laugh and make us feel there's more there's more than we can do right now. That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for coming back to our program.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. It's always a treat and a very nice experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvonne.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.